Welcome back, everyone, to AI Chronicles. Today, I have my guest, Cal. I first met Cal at the Ohio Data Connect conference just last month, and where he asked me a bunch of thoughtful questions during my talk. And right after our chat, and after learning more about his work around responsible and data driven AI, I just knew that he's going to make a great guest for this podcast. So, before we start the episode, how are you doing, Cal?
I'm doing well, and thanks so much, Sanam, for having me. I really enjoyed your talk and the way we both nerded out about quality control. So this is going to be a really fun discussion.
Absolutely. So how are you? I know you keep traveling. So in what corner of United States are you in now?
So this is the home office,
Okay.
and it is a lovely sunset right now, as you can tell from the
Mm,
lighting.
it's the natural light.
Um, exactly. But I just got back from a super fun event that we did in Boston yesterday, where we got to show clients AI in action. And so that's something I've been really focused on this year, not just talking to folks about what AI strategy looks like and what quality control looks like, but here's what guardrails look like in action. Let's
Mhm.
touch it, feel it, talk to these conversational experiences, and then pull up the back end in a way that shows them everything under the tip of the iceberg. So that was
That-
super fun, but I'm glad to be home.
Ah, glad to hear that. Yeah, guardrails and AI, it's like a hot topic as well. I can totally imagine that you had a great conversation.
Yeah,
Now, speaking about AI, which is what we're here for, you
sure.
have been in this world long before GenAI became what it is today. So,
Yeah.
when you look back, what feels like the biggest shift that's shaped the new wave of in AI?
So I often refer to the shift that happened post ChatGPT moment as
Hmm.
AI moving from a raw material into
Hmm.
an actual building block. And so prior to 2022, you really needed to be technical. You needed to be able to work with high volume data sets. You had to have specific engineering skills, know something about natural language processing. And that was such a small subset of people. And it's not surprising that very few use cases actually matured beyond pilots, and there are a handful of things that only the biggest companies could do.
Hmm.
And post ChatGPT, it did two things. One, LLMs became this kind of building block from an engineering perspective that allowed us to solve old problems in more effective ways. So
Hmm.
think traditional robotic process automation, where we had this hope. Look at all the document-driven processes we have in enterprises. And they were so brittle. And one application changed, and all of a sudden, your RPA process doesn't work anymore.
Hmm.
So on the one hand, we have it as an engineering building block, and we're tackling these problems using them. And then on the other hand, it's ignited the imagination because now you don't need to be an engineer. You can access it on your phone. If you know how to give good requirements, more on that later. Big asterisk there. If you know how to give good requirements, you can vibe code your way through a solution. You can vibe code through analysis, and that in turn is what I'm seeing. Our stakeholders are coming to us with more sophisticated questions. I think there's still a lot of ground that we need to cover, and happy to dive more into that. But it's these two things. We now have more robust building blocks that are
Hmm.
allowing automation that we tried to do in the past. And then we have stakeholders that are increasingly aware of what success looks like with AI.
Hmm.
And it's leading to more thoughtful projects, more thoughtful implementations, and that's been the biggest shift. It's went from something that's been a relatively niche topic before to now I'll have conversations regularly with non-technical stakeholders where quality control is top of mind. I'm like, wow, how different, how refreshing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, like speaking of data and the whole quality control, there is a lot of momentum around generative AI, and it feels
Yeah,
like the real differentiator now is data, how it's
sure.
collected, cleaned, and connected.
Yeah.
So, how do you see data engineering evolving to support the complexity of these new systems?
So I'll give an example in one of our clients we recently worked with, and I love sharing the story because we were able to do a public press release about it, something that's on their website. But we worked with Bear Paint
Mhm.
to develop a conversational experience around color selection. So early on, we were working with them, And in their consumer research, they found that the biggest barrier to actually taking a buy action was
Mm-hmm.
indecision over color. And it gets really complicated really quickly. It's a very personal choice. It's non trivial to order the volume of paint you'd need to cover an entire home, especially if you're a do it yourselfer. And to figure out what color is going to work in a dark room versus a light filled room versus whatever. It's a very complicated thing, especially if you're not somebody who's fluent in design. And
Mm-hmm.
they had color consultants, but they could only ever talk to a small fraction of people. So they wanted to partner with us to build this conversational experience around it. And sounds easy on the surface, but
Yeah.
underneath creating a simple chatbot, it had to conform to product description requirements. It couldn't hallucinate features. It had to respect color science and complementary colors. It had to draw from product style catalogs, and it could never recommend the color product of a competitor. So all of a sudden, all of these requirements, oh, and all the usual guardrails, of course, you don't want it going off on a political tangent. We've had instances where we've actually come up with edge cases where it shouldn't provide advice on how to apply paint, for example, and then instead direct a consumer to an appropriate contact number for help to maintain brand expectations and guidelines. And so when you ask me that question of what does data engineering look like, there's a non-trivial amount of orchestration that goes into setting up what data specifications, in this case a detailed product catalog, and how that stays up to date.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the challenges of orchestrating what you do with chat sessions. And so there's whenever you have something that's open to the public, there's all sorts of weird and unnecessary sensitive information that ends up getting passed back and forth no matter how hard you try. And so there has to be orchestration around where that data is stored, how sensitive information is redacted. And these are all critical considerations that are a part of bringing these types of solutions to light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, data engineering is fascinating, and things that people do with data and how they need to handle, it's a whole another skill in art.
Indeed, indeed.
So, shifting gears a little bit from data engineering to one of my favorite topics, which is multimodal AI. We are at the
Yes,
stage of AI. We are at the stage of AI advancement where it can hear and see along with read,
sure.
aka which is multimodal AI. Now, what do you think is most exciting or still misunderstood about this move towards multimodal AI?
So that's a great question. And I've lately been doing a lot of experimentation, as you know, with voice. I think it's early in adoption in the enterprise, but there's already some enterprises that are having success with it. It was fun for me to learn that Domino's now handles 80% of their orders using voice AI.
Oh.
One of the hardest things that happens when you move from just text to now multimodal as input
Mhm.
is you have different sorts of contexts that aren't represented in traditional data sets or text-based data sets, like intonation, speed.
Mhm.
Frustration isn't just expressed in the words used, but how words are said.
Mhm.
And there's still a lot of best practice that's being built now on how to take these things into consideration. Another thing that I've learned recently and come to appreciate deeply about multimodal interactive applications like voice agents is the importance of latency. And
Mhm.
so, truly, you have a lot of decisions to make as far as what level of sophistication can be done, how many tools can be made available. Agents are increasingly getting more capable, but just because we're seeing advancements in agent capability doesn't mean that they're sufficient to be handled in the amount of latency that happens in a real time conversation. And so, on
Yeah.
average, humans have a 500 millisecond latency between when I have an utterance, you process it, and then respond to me. And then if it goes much longer than that, it gets awkward.
Yeah.
And so you really have to think about how do you design these
Mhm.
at the right level and what task complexity is appropriate that can be handled within that window of latency, given the type of model you're trying to use and the price point that you have. And this whole process of where does the human work fit in around that?
Mhm.
And that is a really new way of thinking about things. It's not just automation, it's figuring out what gets automated and then what gets escalated, and how do you hand that off to a human, and how do you plan capacity around that interaction.
That's really well said. And latency, yeah, latency is a very huge challenge. I get asked
Yeah,
a bunch of questions around latency,
yeah,
given my work at Telnix, and I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what we are trying to keep it as minimum as possible and as natural as
yeah.
possible. Totally get the point there. Can you like maybe share more? Like, I know you talked about voice agents, but is there like any other bits from your experience in building any multimodal applications or any tools or products you like?
So I think, and I spend a lot of my time on quality control.
Yeah.
So quality controlling these multimodal applications is also
Oof.
really, really challenging.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say, okay, we're going to come up with a gold standard set of answers, and we're going to use benchmarks to try to determine how well a LLM is going to perform at certain tasks.
Hmm.
But when you start throwing voice into the picture, asking even simple things like, is the customer frustrated? Um, Techniques like LLM as a judge, automated evaluations are really, really hard, and you often have to resort to manual human labeling and other heuristics to complement these automated methods. So I think that that field is maturing, and frankly, an area that I want to spend more time learning about, just quality control on the multimodal side. One
Hmm.
of my favorite use cases that we came across where it uses multimodal is in product identification. So we're working now with a client who they have lifetime warranties on products, and they've got millions of products they've sold over their you know multiple decades of existence. And it's actually a non-trivial thing when a customer calls in and says, I have ABC product and I don't know what it is, but here's a picture of it. Can you help me figure
Yeah.
out what
Yeah.
replacement I need? And so that's a great example of an opportunity to leverage a multimodal LLM combined with other heuristics. But the quality control around that project is going to be really interesting. So we're in early days of scoping that out, but I'm really excited about that use case.
That's a great example. Also, a very non-podcast related question. What's your
Yeah.
cat's name?
Oh my goodness. So this is Jet, and whenever I've been away from home, he likes to intrude and he likes to participate in all of my meetings. So Jet is over here.
Ah, how nice. A new podcast guest I didn't know about. All right.
If I close the door, he would
Mhm.
participate vocally. So right now he's only participating visually.
Okay, okay. Very multimodal of of him. Okay, going back to our multimodal discussion. So, like I'm sure you know this, not every company has the infrastructure or data maturity to go fully multimodal. So,
Correct.
for those trying to start small, where do you think the most practical Gen AI use cases lie today?
So I talk to clients a lot about outcomes and how to think about measuring outcomes. And something that I want to scream louder is
Mhm.
efficiency is the single worst outcome to base a project's success around. And for many reasons, but whenever you save time, there's only so much time you can save. And that time that you've saved is now either wasted or put to work in other ways, and it's unclear what the value of that other work is. So when I start advising clients on what use cases really make for the killer use case for that business, it has to one touch something related to their core IP, and they
Mhm.
have to have a very compelling outcome that's tied to a clear business KPI. So, does solving this reduce customer friction? Does it increase ease of doing business? Does it increase customer satisfaction? Is this going to grow average basket size? So, in this case, we know for a fact that customers increasingly are frustrated when they can't find, the one multimodal example I gave, what product it is, and that increases call volume burden on the client side. And there's a direct cost to supporting these calls. And structuring a use case around that makes a lot of sense instead of saying, how much time are we saving?
Mm-hmm.
on these
Makes
calls.
sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
I,
it's constrained enough where we're not really talking about this isn't cross departmental, this doesn't require a lot of change management. It's a very specific function, it's a well defined type of agentic experience with a limited set of inputs, or at least a known set of inputs. And so it's like check, check, check. It's small, high impact, very specific, clear tied to business outcomes, green light.
hmm. You think like going into the niche instead of being a whole generalist for especially for the small startups or small
Sure.
businesses, does the niche really help to figure that out and then come up with like, okay, I guess arranging the business outcomes and like what kind of technology to use or what kind of solutions there could be? Do you
Sure.
think that matters?
So I like to separate out the problems
Mm-hmm.
to solve from the
Mm-hmm.
tools you use to solve that problem.
Yeah, makes
So
sense.
in context of what I'm talking about, I'm giving the lens of the enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
So most of my clients are Fortune 1000, they're larger enterprises, and they're they're oftentimes they have a laundry list of like, oh my god, there's like 300 potential AI pilots we could run, and you
Mm-hmm.
can't run all of them all at once. So we have to work with them on prioritizing. What are the right problems? Forget about the tools. What's worth solving? What do you build? What do you buy? On the startup side of the equation, there's a totally separate set of advice I would give, and for companies building products. Know that you are competing against, by default, whenever you're selling into the enterprise,
Mm-hmm.
all of the other tools in the ecosystem and all the change management that goes into bringing a new tool into that ecosystem, whether it's you're changing workflow or you're now presumably competing with budget that might have been allocated for AWS spend or GCP spend or Azure, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the the outcome of what you're building needs to be so significant that it's worth a client taking a bet on introducing you into their vendor mix and adding that friction or change management that they're going to have to deal with. And so the more specific you are about what specific problems you're addressing and what outcomes that has, the more likely you are to succeed in those contests. I just had a conversation this morning with the CIO of a health system,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that he talked about is their CFO is now cracking down on the AI vendors that are pitching the hospital system and asking very specific questions. We've had 2 years of do the pilots, do the pilots. They now ask specifically, what is the measurable outcome? If you can't spell that out, they will not move forward. And it's not efficiency. They're looking for effectiveness outcomes.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
That's challenging, I would say, but I guess it's very necessary to figure that out in early stages, especially. Okay.
yeah. I call it the world of LLM economics. We're finally
Ah,
being held accountable.
I mean, it's about time. I mean, yeah, somebody
Yeah,
gotta be held accountable for all this. Totally agree with
yeah,
that. Do you think, like, like the outcomes that we talked about? So, like, as companies rush to integrate generative AI, what
yeah.
do you think is the like the biggest blind spot you see when it comes to building systems that are both, well, powerful and accountable, like we just mentioned?
I still think we have AI literacy challenges.
Mm,
And I know a lot of companies over the past few years have invested in AI literacy programs. Most of the enterprises I worked with, I was at this roundtable this morning with a bunch of CIOs, and they're like, yeah, we all did the AI 101 training, and we still have this problem. What's missing is actually having hands on experience and hands on lab time. You have all these enterprises saying we need to be AI first. We need everybody to use these AI tools.
mm,
And they roll out trainings and then they start scratching their heads like why is this not getting solved? In my experience, the clients that do this the best, they implement internal hackathons, they have internal workshops. So let's say, we wanted to cultivate better use around Copilot or Gemini.
mm,
Instead of just doing a one-time training, you do the training and then you have a monthly, we're going to have a 2-hour block where you use Gemini to solve various different problems and you're going to practice various different prompting techniques. And you don't do it the same, you don't do it once, you do the same type of exercise multiple times over until there's that familiarity. And that is how you start to drive transformation.
mm.
So I think a lot of enterprises almost approach this as if, okay, get Copilot, get Gemini, get whatever, and then we're done. And then they said, okay, we have to do training. All right, we're going to do a one-time training, and then we're done. And then now enterprises are broadly realizing literacy is a problem, and there's no easy button around it.
AI literacy. Haven't thought about it, but it makes just so much sense, especially like in the big corporation. Not everybody is accustomed to the new AI tech.
For
It
sure.
totally makes sense. Okay,
Well, if you
thanks
go
for bringing
back
that.
to, yeah, I mean,
Go.
like if you go back to the start of our conversation, the two differences
Yep.
I talked about are we have AI literacy
Mhm.
on the one hand, and that is ability to give better requirements, and then there's using it as building blocks.
Mhm.
And this type of contact training increases the quality of both. And
Mhm.
as you know, the better requirements we get as engineers, the better the result is going to be. And so I will say it
100%.
louder and louder, more AI literacy leads to better results.
I agree. That's the highlight, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, just to, to wrap it up,
Cool.
if you think ahead a few years,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of relationship do you imagine we will have with these generative AI systems? Do you think like they'll fade into the background or become maybe more like collaborators we depend on daily?
Oh my gosh. So that's a hard question. Predicting anything longer than 12 months is but I'll take the bait. I'll go for it. I think we're gonna have a very K-shaped I don't know, bust happen over the next few years. So there's going to be certain use cases that
Okay.
truly are incredible and phenomenal, like agentic coding. That is one that is on the rise. I don't see that ever going away, truly. I don't know that we're going to be in a world where AI writes code and we don't ever code again. I don't know how I feel about that. That's an
Mm,
example of a use case that's going to continue to mature.
mm,
I think we're going to get to the realization that for a lot of other use cases, like our idealistic future state of autonomous agents handling knowledge work in a way that's like a coworker,
mm,
is much farther off than we would like to believe. And one guarantee I always give clients whenever we talk about anything AI is they're probabilistic systems. So that means they're going to make mistakes, period. Just take that as an assumption. The goal isn't to get a system to be like 0.0001 error.
mm,
In most cases, you might still see like a 10%, 20% error rate, especially on really challenging domains. So the art isn't to try to minimize error, but rather to think about this as a workflow redesign. So we did a project last year where we were applying LLMs to pull information from student transcripts, for example. And we found that certain transcript sets, if they came from certain universities or foreign institutions, the model's performance on them tanked.
mm,
There's features about the data or inputs or, if it's a voice agent that you can process that give you some heuristic of whether or not the AI is more likely to make an error. And
mm,
so part of the art of succeeding is acknowledging that errors will happen, figuring out what are the circumstances that cause errors to arise, and then designing human AI handoffs around that. And so what do I think the work is going to look like in a few
mm,
years is we're going to have gotten a lot better at figuring out how to orchestrate back and forth between
mm.
autonomous AI systems and human workers.
Got it. Okay.
Whoop.
I'm
We
loving
might
the
have to
background.
cut
Yeah,
we
I'm
might have
loving.
to cut
Fine.
that 15 seconds. Oreo, buddy, I'm doing a very important talk, so you got to be quiet. He's ready for dinner.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cal, for such an insightful conversation. This was really good. The point that stuck out with me was that AI literacy, and I'm gonna give it more a thought. That's really essential. Cool. And to everybody listening, thank you so much for your attention and time. Hope you enjoyed the cat guest and Cal, I guess.
He was the main show. But
Yeah,
thank you
yeah.
so much for having me, Sonam. I really
My
enjoyed it.
pleasure. Bye.